Is this genre really that repetitive? Or am I just stupid? Or both? Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to a rambling discussion on something that I've recently realized about myself, and I'm trying to figure out how this happened. So, I am working on becoming a data book girly for 2023. I want to be one of those people that is really on top of the TBR and really researches the books and has like the color-coded spreadsheets for tracking the series. Will I manage it? Doubtful, but as I was going through some of the data and kind of like clearing things out and DNFing and all this kind of stuff to prepare myself to be the data girly in 2023, I realized that there is a genre of books that have come through my library in rather large amounts. But for whatever reason, the details of the stories don't stick. Like, at all. And it was the strangest thing because I could remember details from books that I'd read years ago before I even started tracking, because I'm trying to continue series that I started reading before I started my channel. And I'm like, oh yeah, I can kind of remember like there are a couple facts from this book. But 9 times out of 10, when I read a book from this genre, I can't hardly remember any specifics. I will stare at the titles on my tracker sheet and be like, okay, what was in that? Or I will look at the covers on Goodreads, desperately trying to think of any particulars. And I can like remember what readathon I read it for and what prompt I read it to fulfill in that readathon better than I can remember anything that happened in the story. And that genre is Regency romance. Now, when I say Regency romance, I am referring to the modern genre of romance meant to take place during the Regency period of England. And historical periods never have a very hard beginning and end date, but give or take, the Regency era was somewhere in the early 1800s to maybe 1820s, 1830s. It had definitely died out by the time Victoria took the throne, but apart from that, it's hard to figure out when did it start and when did it end, but comparatively, it's kind of a shortish period of time. Like the Victorian era itself was like 70 years because Victoria just reigned forever, and comparatively, Regency was much shorter. On top of that, it was also a very specific time and place thing in that it was only England that really lived by these specific rules, and even then, only the upper crusts, only the people who had the money and reputation to be worried about these things like strictures and rumors and gossip. So comparatively to a lot of other historical genres, although I guess Western, like the American frontier was also a lot shorter lived than you think it was. But comparatively, it's a tiny portion of a tiny populace for a tiny period of time. So as a result, you don't have a lot to play with to begin with, which I think might be part of the problem when I say that a lot of these just go over my head, because a lot of the same tropes are used constantly, and that's not different than any other genre. Every genre has its tropes, but because you're dealing with such strictures, so you have like, it's almost like the setting itself comes built in with tropes that you then use tropes within. So you end up with like little fractal points of tropes, and then the same tropes just keep getting used because that's what actually fits in this general setting. So you have a lot of things like arranged marriages or marriages of convenience, and very few like torrid affairs, more or less. Like, yeah, most of these books will have a sex scene or two. I haven't come across one that's like super kinky yet, but I could just be missing that subgenre. It's possible. Regardless, I've kind of discovered that it's so hard to really uncover a lot because I can't remember which of the 10 books I've read had the man didn't want to get married and which of them had the woman didn't want to get married. Because that's a big thing. A lot of these marriage of convenience or arranged marriage stuff, one of them didn't want to get married. And it is kind of funny because it's gotten to a point where the idea of a character not wanting to be married is its own trope in the genre, to the extent that it breaks willing suspension of disbelief for the entire genre, because you have to believe that all of these dozens, if not hundreds of characters who were raised to believe in this very structured upbringing with, they were taught good etiquette and good breeding and for the express purpose of marriage, somehow all managed on their own to gain a rebellious spirit and push against it, like, universally. Like, you have to believe, like, all of that at once. And yes, like, Jane Austen was well known for being scandalous, but they literally burned her letters. She was so scandalous. Like, these brazen bitches in these Regency romances. And that's why I would often separate these, like, written after the fact Regency romances out from the actual, like, Jane Austen written. It's like comparing the actual dress from the time period to a Spirit Halloween costume. It's not the same. This genre is not actually trying to replicate anything from that time period, but they're also not really investigating a lot in it either. A lot of Regency romance tends to use the sexism inherent in the strictures of the society without really delving any more into them. For example, a lot of the books will use tropes of the woman's reputation being shattered because of scandalous thing. And back then it wasn't like, getting pregnant out of wedlock. Even if you had a kiss in, a dark garden, you were gone. Your reputation was done and you had to get married to save it, and that would somehow do it. That's why you see in, like, Bridgerton, that kind of thing. And also there were moments in some stories where there were legal issues and the woman couldn't get justice for herself without having a husband, or had to pretend that the work she was doing was actually her father's. And there's a lot of, like, focus on the sexism to begin with, but, and again, partially because this is a romance, it's all solved through marriage. So the books don't tend to really delve into the problems of the society they're placed in, because the problems for that specific character are solved because she genuinely comes to love the husband that saves her from the sexism. So why go into it any further? And they're also a little bit talking about some of the pressures put on men in this time period. And, like, yeah, there were. Most men needed to get married and have heirs if they were the eldest born son, but almost only if you were the eldest born son. Like, second, third, fourth sons can get away with a lot more. And so they'll talk about these things, but it's never delved into. Like, the woman is completely fine with the sexist society she lives in because she loves the husband, so clearly everything's fine now. And I get that a lot of these romances are put in this era as kind of a dream version of it. Most historical romances are not trying to actually be decent representations of the historical time period they're made in. And if anyone tries to tell you that they're doing certain things because of historical accuracy, that is 90% of the time a smokescreen, because in a lot of cases, you won't even hear of any, like, historical things going on, or they'll just name drop some things, the Napoleonic War, and be done. So it's very dreamlike in a lot of cases, which also can go, kind of contribute to it kind of just sliding over my brain, where they want the generic happy ending at the end without any hard discussions, without any angst lingering. So nothing lingers. and that might be part of it. And there are also tropes within the genre that aren't necessarily inherent to the time period, but just became a thing. A lot of secret societies of gentlemen who, on the surface, are austere members of society, but secretly they hunt bad guys, or you have magic powers or something. And then the series goes through where, like, each one of the dudes gets a wife. And sometimes the reverse, if it's a woman-based romance series where it's every woman going through, 9% of the time it's going to be a group of sisters or close friends. Because in this time period, the secret society of people doing secret things apparently was only men. Because most of the books can come up with cool secret societies, but only for the gentlemen. Which might be part of my other issue, is that in a lot of historical romances, there's so much romanticization and like fantasy building to a certain extent, but then it always hits the wall where it's like, oh yes, we can believe that this Viscount had magical powers, but a woman being in charge of a mystical society, of course not. Like, it gets very frustrating at times. But as a result, with a lot of these built-in heteronormative defaults in the genre, as an extension of the supposed strictures of the time period, that kind of falls into more of why that keeps happening like that, why it tends to be the secret society is only dudes. And the women are always at risk from a sexist society that is never critiqued further than it gets them to be married, so therefore low-key must be a good thing. And in most cases, like, even if they had a bad relationship, like, you know, they were a widow and their first husband was horrible, like, and they were forced into that marriage and they had to do it, they still don't critique the system, they just critique the first husband and not the entire societal structure that made that woman feel forced into that marriage, like that kind of thing, or the societal structure that made it impossible for the woman to leave that marriage until the dude was dead. And somehow in these books, the horrible husband just always dies on his own. Like, I'm sorry, you can't give me a little bit of murder as a treat? I can't even get that. And it's just very frustrating because I would like more critique and I would like more delving into, and I would like a bigger, having something to say about the time period in general that's not just, look how much fun it is, look how great it would be to go to a ball and wear an empire waist gown and, you know, be the diamond of the season. Like, if you're gonna give me angst, there's so much angst in the setup of this, just go with that. And of course, with all that heteronormativity and being based in historical England, we have the issues of there being very few people of color and there being next to no queer people in any of this. That's why, if you've ever seen people talking about Bridgerton, the TV show, online, I've seen a lot of you be like, it's not a Regency romance. It 100% is a Regency romance. It's got all the hallmarks, but seeing Black people, especially a Black lead in a Regency romance, is so rare that people assume it must make it different than literally all the rest of it, because all the rest of it is so lily white. And I know what you're going to say, but Margaret, this specific author purposefully wrote a book that has a Black lead in a Regency romance. I know Courtney Milan has made a point of writing some, I believe, Chinese-based characters in historical romances before, but they're also in response to a lily white genre. And that's kind of my frustration, is there's so much dreamy dramatization, romanticism of this time period, but it never goes farther than what heteronormativity and colonialism allows. We can imagine all these fantastical things, but queer people being happy and Black people existing. Like, that's kind of the big frustration, is a lot of the ingredients of every book are the same. And so the differences between them are smaller and smaller because, yeah, you might be using a slightly different recipe, but all of the same food is being put into the dish. So you're not going to get anything that tastes all that different than if you actually shook it up. Now, obviously, I don't necessarily want people who don't feel confident in writing characters of color or queer characters to suddenly start shoving them into Regency romances. I'd rather see more people from those genres start writing them more. And yes, some probably do exist. Feel free to put those down in the comments below. But by and large, if you're picking up a Regency romance, 99% of the time, you're getting white, heteronormative, male-female couple where both of them are straight. So we've talked about all of the things that make Regency romance kind of same-like between every book, in that everyone is starting from already such a narrow scope that they don't have a lot of chances to be broadened out. But that same point, such a narrow scope means these tropes would be so easy to play with. Have the secret society of nobility working behind the scenes be women. Have it be a situation where a woman is face to face with the sexism of her society, forcing her into a thing, And it isn't all just kissed away by actually loving the husband she was forced to marry. Like, have there be serious implications after the fact. Hell, build a similar society to the Regency era in a completely fantastical world, a la Bridgerton, where these other things can happen. You want the fun of the balls and the societal strictures that you can play with and have the characters sneak around between. You can still have that. Most Regency romance is already so off the mark with the actual time period, it wouldn't be that hard to actually just say, screw it, pick it up, move it, place it somewhere else. And I know for a fact that some people are already doing this, because one of my hyped releases that I will be doing a video for 2023 is a monster romance in the Regency period. It will be, I'm gonna forget the name, How to Marry a Marble Marquise, I believe, by Steve Acosta, title cover there. But this is a Regency romance with monsters, where monsters are just out and about, accepted as part of society, but also have to follow all these societal strictures. And I love that idea. I love the idea of getting to play with it, because the societal strictures and characters being forced to appear to live within them, but then not living within them, is the fun of a Regency romance. I want to see, like, more critique of the system, more rebellion, actual rebellion. This character doesn't want to be married does not count as actual rebellion, because we all know they're gonna end up married, gonna end up loving their husband, and so the marriage isn't gonna be an issue. That's not actual rebellion. I'm talking about someone that, yeah, maybe does fall in love with the person they were forced to marry, but then think to themselves, you know what? No, it was bullshit. I love you, but I should never have been forced to marry you. And, like, still moving against the system. Like, I want that. I want, like, the married people to not settle and accept our sexist, racist system just because they got a hot husband or a hot wife. Show me the ongoing rebellion. But in general, this sounds like I hate Regency romance, and I literally put in the title that it's my favorite. But I do love the concept of it, of playing with this time period that is so different from ours, that has all these strictures that seem completely foreign to us now. The idea that kissing someone means you'd be forced to marry them, like, there's fun in it, and you can play with it, and I totally get why it's been such a beloved subgenre of romance for so long. It's just, we gotta broaden the playing field. We gotta really delve into what the time period was, what strictures are we playing in, and really get into the nitty-gritty of it, so we stop having these copy and paste stories that just never stick in the mind. Now, thank you so much for listening to my rambling. I want to get into a lot more rambling discussions moving forward, where I just get to have fun talking about random topics off the top of my head. If you have any recommendations for Regency romances that you think really pushed the boundaries and did something different, used, you know, quote unquote, different ingredients or what have you, please let me know. I would love to have those recommendations. As usual, if you have any other monster romance recommendations, I am always looking for those as well. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.